So when the tomb is opened and the body is not there, they were afraid. Well, you can imagine how frightening that would be. I don't know what I would do. And it isn't just any body that is missing, it's the body of this incredibly important person whose ministry was not just moving, but remarkable for its time and any time, really. Now, if you've heard the story, you have a pretty firm idea of what happened next, including how the women were chastised and discounted for their telling of the story. And only after the men had met the risen Jesus on the road and poked into his wounds did they believe what the women had reported, that he was resurrected. I think we need to leave first century Jerusalem and think about this a bit. So let's close our eyes once more and return to our homes in 2021. Those men on the road sound an awful lot like us. We like to have proof. After all, as Unitarian Universalists, we're grounded in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, meaning we look for evidence and things that make sense. Faith seems unbelievable, foolish even. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to look in on an empty tomb and decide the missing body meant he was raised from the dead and not stolen or not actually dead. Faith is a pretty foolish thing when you're looking at it through the lens of reason and fact. Even Paul, in his letter to the Hebrews, describes the foolishness of faith in writing that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And yet, without faith, there is no hope. Faith, as foolish as it seems, is the substance of things hoped for. Oh, and Lordy, do we need hope right now. All around us is anger and divisiveness and violence and hate and destruction and oppression. Things are so rough. We struggle still in this pandemic. We struggle against untethered greed. We struggle against the culture of white supremacy. People are rising up and some are dying. It would be so easy to simply take care of our own, deny involvement, betray one another, to lose hope and give up. But we are asked over and over by our faith, by hope itself, to not give up, to remember our covenant, to remember our principles, to remember our cause. Yes, on the face of it, it all seems foolish. And to lean into a story of a man from over 2,000 years ago as a basis for hope seems especially foolish. But here's what we know. Those who heard him 2,000 years ago heard his message of hope and love and liberation. They heard their own stories in his, their own suffering, their own struggles. They heard a new message of hope that transcended any others of the time. The death of Jesus to these people was devastating. He was their leader, their inspiration, their prophet, their teacher, maybe their Messiah. How could they possibly continue? Imagine the cynicism of the disciples knowing the one they believed in had been killed by the state they had been resisting for 3 years. Yet in that cynicism and loss, the women react not with tears, but with great emptiness. And despite the emptiness, they go through the motions, doing what needs to be done. I always imagine the male disciples holed up in the back room of a pub somewhere, grieving their movement, while the women saw to it that the proper rituals were performed, even if there didn't seem to be any point at all. And it was through the act of going through the motions, despite the emptiness and pointlessness, that they found the beginnings of resurrection. It didn't happen that day. Anyone who has lost someone beloved knows that there are many, many hard days without hope, with pain, with grief. But slowly, healing happens. And I suspect for these people 2,000 years ago, the hope of resurrection crept in slowly over time. The resurrection story grows because his followers needed hope, the hope that Jesus preached in the face of continued oppression. This story remains because if we have ears to listen, we still hear our own stories in the stories he told. We hear our own current realities in the realities he was addressing. This story remains because it is a personal call to draw the circle of love wide. Jesus didn't tell his followers to save the whole world, just their slice of it. When you think about the prophets and change makers of history, even our recent history, they set out to bring liberation and justice to those right around them. Whether it's Moses trying to lead his people out of slavery in Egypt, or Harriet Tubman trying to lead her people out of slavery in the American South. Whether it's Rachel Carson warning us decades ago to care for the earth, or Greta Thunberg imploring us to enact effective climate justice. Whether it's Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s starting the Poor People's Campaign, William Barber taking up that same call for radical economic justice. Whether it's James Brady in the 80s calling for gun control, or Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg from Parkland calling over and over for the end of gun violence. Or us facing the realities of oppression and discrimination in our families, our communities. Every single person begins with the people in front of them: family, friends, neighbors, fellow congregants, our communities. That is where we affect change with our own foolish hope for a better future. This story remains because it reminds us that hope is not foolish. Jesus' story, the Easter story, remains because we need hope to be eternal. And whether the story is gospel truth or a story pointing to something larger, the hope and the possibility of Easter remains. This story remains because it calls us back to love our neighbor as ourselves, to see the inherent worth of every person, to fight for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, to promote world community, to honor the interdependent web of all existence, to draw the circle wide, to hope for a better life. The tomb is empty, and hope lives. And there's the resurrection. Happy Easter.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kimberly. As we extinguish our virtual chalice today, please join me in these words by Amy Zucker Morgenstern. When we take fire from our chalice, it does not become less, it becomes more. And so we extinguish our chalice, but we take its light and warmth with us, multiplying their power by all of our lives and sharing it with the world. Our closing song for today is O Day of Light and Gladness.
What thoughts within us
We hope that each of you, on your individual path through the joys and questions of life, found some common ground with your fellow travelers today. Reverend Kimberly will provide our benediction.
Our benediction are from the Reverend Richard Gilbert. A tomb is no place to stay, be it a cave in the Judean hills or the dark cavern of the spirit. A tomb is no place to stay when fresh grass rolls away the stone of winter cold, and valiant flowers burst their way to warmth and light. The tomb is no place to stay when each morning announces our reprieve, and we know we are granted yet another day of living. A tomb is no place to stay when life laughs a welcome to hearts that have been away too long. Hallelujah. Happy Easter. Go in love, go in joy, go in peace.